if you don't know the answer to something, for God's sake, say, I don't know. Because paradoxically, that's the most credibility enhancing thing you can say. Everybody else is going to tell you how smart they are, and maybe they don't know exactly this, but they know that, and they get the information. Who cares? If you're willing to say, I don't know, that sets you apart from everybody. It says you're self-confident enough. You're not enough of a BS artist to claim that you know everything. Wow. Suddenly people relax and say, okay, this guy's not going to lie to me. So, I mean, that sounds like a small thing, but the ability to admit you don't know something turns out to be exactly, you wouldn't expect it, but it works.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Learning podcast. My guest here today is Charles Green, who is the founder of Trusted Advisor Associates. Charles, it's great to have you here today.
Likewise. Thank you very much for having me.
Tell everyone a little bit more about you and a little bit more about the business so they have some context, obviously, into the things that we'll be speaking about today.
Well, the main reason I'm here talking to you today is that I co-authored a book about 24 years ago called The Trusted Advisor, which I, shamelessly borrowed to name the name of the business, also Trusted Advisor Associates. Since then, I've written 2 other books, but that was still the biggest seller of the 3. I have an MBA from Harvard Business School. Before I wrote that book, 20 years in management consulting. And that's basically it.
Awesome. And tell everyone a little bit about what you guys, obviously the name can kind of give away a lot of it.
That was the intention.
Talk to me a little bit more about who you guys help, what exactly you do. Maybe a little bit more.
I should add, first of all, I have sold the business about 4 years ago. I'm kind of chairman emeritus now. Mm-hmm. I'm still somewhat active, but from afar. Yeah. So I'm about 80% retired at this point. But main clientele is, I guess, 2 groups, professional services firms, which means accounting, consulting, advertising, communications, actuaries, that kind of thing, and B2B sales. I wrote another book called Trust-Based Selling, which focuses on that one. So those are primary 2 vertical segments.
Awesome. And when it comes to the business, obviously, you managed to sell the company, which is what a lot of entrepreneurs kind of have as their goal, their target.
Yeah.
I want to ask 2 things about that. Number one is, how did you feel after you sold? Because often the most common story we hear is people sell and they're like, oh, so happy, and they're like, oh, okay, what now? What do I do now? So 1, how did you feel? And 2, talk to me about some of the things that you learned throughout that sales process or throughout that exit process that were maybe new to you, that you didn't think was, or maybe it surprised you a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it was never my goal to sell the business. My goal was to work on issues related to trusted relationships in business. And that turned out to be helpful because in the end, I had a big problem selling the business. And the problem came from the fact that first book, The Trusted Advisor, which was the basis for a lot of it, was co-authored with 2 other guys. And which meant that there was a problem with the ownership of intellectual property. I could, sell a client list. I could sell, ongoing relationships, but not some of the underlying ideas, which for a business like ours is kind of important. That's an issue that the 3 of us faced right after we wrote the book. We started getting leads, and we went through the conversation, the 3 of us, how should we share these leads? Should we take turns? Should we, flip a coin? And we decided that in keeping with the message in the book, we should be transparent with inquiries and say, listen, there are 3 of us that wrote this. You should pick the one who's the best. So here's the contact info for the 2 other guys. Pick who you feel, best with. And it's all fine with us. We're focused on you, which is very much a message that was core to the book. And I tried to build the business, along the lines of that very same kind of idea. Mm-hmm. And when it came to sell, I could not put, a dollar number on it. So what I did, I sold it to, one of the chief people within the firm, and she and I agreed it would be a handshake deal. We didn't involve lawyers or accountants with an agreement. And we agreed also it would be nothing down, but a declining percentage of gross profits in perpetuity.
Mm.
So I still get, quarterly checks from her. We talk all the time. And our accountants and lawyers couldn't believe it when we said, this is how we want to do it. They said, but you have to have. And we said, no, we don't. I trust
Yeah.
her. She trusts me. So it's an unusual kind of a
Yeah.
story. I mean, I made out fine financially, but it
Hmm.
wasn't your traditional kind of a deal because I never set out to do a traditional deal.
Hmm. That's so interesting. Yeah, I can confidently say that's the first I've ever heard of anything like that for a sale,
It's
for a sale
unusual.
of, for the sale of a business. That's so interesting. So you didn't have to go through the bureaucracy
Nope,
and going back on the tax records and all that annoying stuff that
nope,
we often hear
nope,
about.
nope,
Huh.
nope.
That's so
We just
interesting.
Well,
And
if you believe in trust, which we do, then
mm,
it would have been almost antithetical to our principles to do it otherwise. You
mm,
know?
yeah, that sounds about right. And when it comes to so the book was about 24 years ago, you said.
Yeah.
And how long did you hold the business for?
I think we made the transfer in what this is 2020, about 2021, 2020 or 2021. So
Mm,
4 or 5
okay.
years ago.
Okay, okay, awesome. And throughout the career, your career with leading the business and
Yeah.
obviously growing to the point where you managed to sell it, what were some of the biggest challenges in getting to that position? Obviously, I think trust is a huge component of any type of business relationship, and
Yeah.
oftentimes from conversations that I have, companies seem to struggle with that the most. And
Yes.
yes, they can excel with word of mouth and
Right.
referrals,
Which
which is a part of it, and it kind of borrows that trust. But anything
right.
beyond that, a lot of companies I speak with, um, to me or to you, it may be simple on how to solve that. But how did you solve for that for your business to be able to transfer that trust over?
Right.
And yeah, maybe to some of the challenges of doing that.
Well, it's an interesting question. I think yeah, trust is an issue for almost any business. You're right. And there are two kinds of people: those who believe that and those who don't. And we can waste an awful lot of time trying to prove to people with data and studies and analytics that trust is really important. If they don't believe it right away, forget it.
Mm,
They're not going to be convinced by any data or statistics I can quote you.
mm,
So the market has a nice way of self-selecting. Those who do contract with us are people who already sort of believe, yeah, that's really important, and we need to get better at it.
mm-hmm,
So let's work together. And those who probably never be convinced,
mm,
certainly not by rational arguments anyway.
mm,
So that helped. And then if you think about how people become persuaded or how people accept advice or how people buy, and you think about how trust relates to that, there's some things that work and some things that don't. You have
mm-hmm,
to have some, expertise, domain expertise, credibility, competencies,
mm-hmm,
and we've got a few models and ideas in history that speak to that. But the
mm,
fact is, people change their minds or decide to make a buying decision on a mixture of rational and emotional, which is
mm-hmm.
how trust works too.
Yeah.
So you have to have the rational, credibility stuff, which is why when I give keynote speeches, I always say in advance, okay, tell them I wrote 3 books. I'm a Harvard Business School graduate, 20 years of management consulting. And that's to get me, in the door and to get people to come into the room.
Mm,
Once you're there in front of a room, the first thing I do is tell a stupid story about myself and what an idiot I was in this one situation. It's the same thing you do in a job interview. You send in a resume, and the resume gets you the interview. Once you're in the interview, if all you do is keep reading from your resume, you lost the job
mm,
because the job then is to do something different, is to connect with people
mm-hmm,
personally. Well, that's how trust works. That's how influence works. That's how sales work. So in a way, it was just kind of rediscovering the basics of trust and applying it to our market situations.
mm,
So that itself was a kind of a big discovery. I remember also, how do you get the credibility? I had a lot of ideas. I wanted to write. This is back when blogs were kind of just coming into the picture. I'd written the books, but I decided we needed a blog
sure.
or an article. And I tried like heck to get into Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Review, Wall Street Journal, all these things. And I wasn't having any luck. And I finally decided to hell with it. I'll just write my own blog and put it out there.
Sure.
And that worked. I mean, I've written about 1,000 blogs and articles over the
Wow.
decades. And
Yeah.
it's not about, there's a whole business that goes about search engine optimization. SEO used to be a big thing. But we never depended on people discovering us by running across it. What we did was figure out that's the repository, that's the library, that's where you store stuff. And what you do is refer people to it. You meet them
Mm-hmm.
and you say, by the way, check out these articles on trustedadvisor.com. And they
Mm-hmm.
can go and read them all. Ditto for YouTube clips and other social media. So, and that was also don't wait on some algorithm to be discovered. Make human connections and point them to this repository of background that you have. And people go there and they, oh wow, this is great. I didn't know this existed. Well, sure, that's why I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. So the main methodology for you was on one, obviously put yourself out there, make sure
Yep,
that there's content existing.
that's right.
But was it then that organic concept of, hey, here's what we have, just go get free value from it, and from the free value, people were just I guess, tumble down into becoming customers, or was it a part of it as well, being able to educate the customers on the value that you guys bring? Like how is
No,
that dynamic there?
it's not the second one. It's not educating people on how
Mm,
important it is. It really, and this is how I advise people too in business development these days. Don't depend on AI. Don't depend on LinkedIn. Don't depend on algorithms and lead generation and emails. Make personal connections.
mm,
Have conversations that develop organically. And then if it turns out that in those conversations I might have something to offer them, mention it.
mm,
Because once you're talking with people about what they are interested in, they become far more receptive because you paid attention to them. That's the
mm,
same advice I got of the 3 books that I was involved with. We hired a publicist for the first 2, and it was wasted money. They did the old thing of book fairs and go to bookstores and tours and all that. The
yeah.
third one, I ran across the guy who used to do promotion for Tom Peters, who was a really big deal author, umpteen years ago. He wrote In
Mm-hmm,
Search of Excellence. And what he said was, before you publish your book, start a year ahead of time, list 100 people that you'd love to be influencers for your book, go to their websites, go to their blogs, and comment on their articles and their postings.
mm,
Because anybody who puts out content, you love it when somebody comments on it. Oh wow, they noticed me. And if you're able to have dialogues that are content based and intelligent, you do that a few
mm-hmm,
times, they really notice you. So after a while, it becomes pretty easy to say, by the way, I got a new
yeah,
book coming out. Would you mind? No, they don't
yeah,
mind at all. They're happy to.
mm-hmm,
So it's attraction, not promotion,
huh,
that drives it. And that, again, echoes the dynamics of personal trust.
yeah,
So we spent very little on advertising and promotion and a
hmm,
lot on outreach. Give free samples is a good way to do things.
mm-hmm,
Um, we made sure, for example, we offered service guarantees.
oh, yeah,
uh, Absolute guarantee. If for any reason you're unhappy with the work that we did, and you don't even have to tell us why, you just tell us what you think it was worth and pay us that,
mm,
including zero. And by the
hmm.
way, nobody's ever taken us up on that. It's a pretty
It's
safe
always,
thing to
yeah,
offer.
yeah, that's
But
awesome.
but they
And
appreciate the offer. Very similar dynamic when I tell people, for example, on pricing. One of the biggest questions is, a potential client says, "Gee, I don't know, the price is kind of high."
mm,
Or traditional sales wisdom says, never mention price until you've established value. Well, that's stupid, because if you've ever sat in the customer's seat and you listen to somebody pitch you, the one thing in their head is, how much is this going to cost? And rather than saying, wait until the end of the presentation, you've lost them after 5 minutes. So start
mm,
off by saying, hey, listen, I don't know, this sounds like a low 5-digit number or a high 6-digit number or something. We'll refine it as we talk, but at least that's off the table. You've
mm.
acknowledged it. You've been transparent right up front. And so there's a few, again,
Interesting.
trust. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I would love to hear about, obviously it's always going to be a different dynamic as you're growing the business, for the things that you're going through, the things you're figuring out, what you're
Yes.
trying to implement, and how they differ from where it is like years down the line. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, what was that shift? What was the difference in between what you just explained, from when the business was starting to grow, obviously building that trust, all those things, to attract customers, and where were those challenges, or what were those challenges, as you left the business? How do they differ?
It's still the same. I mean,
Mm,
our first, here, I'll give you an analogy. There's a woman that
sure.
used to be my financial planner, very successful financial planner, never spent a nickel in her lifetime on promotion or advertising, nothing.
Mm,
All she does is referrals. And the reason she does that is because the way she works, she'll run, she'll get introduced to somebody. They start to talk. They say, "Oh, you're a financial planner,"
Mm,
and they'll talk, and she'll say, "You know what you really need? You need a divorce attorney. You need childcare. Let me put you in
mm,
touch with somebody who." And she becomes the hub of referrals to other people. That's a very valuable person, a person
mm,
who understands law, money, personal relationships. And guess what? Why not give your financial planning business to that person because she's so valuable to you in all these other aspects of your life? She becomes the first person you call
mm,
when you need help with something. And by the way, how's my finances doing? She's very good at
mm,
that too. And I think that's what we did. I think our first big client was Towers Parent, as I recall, which doesn't even exist as a company anymore.
mm.
Once you get one big client, I mean, the referrals fall in. First of all, you get a lot of repeat business, and then you say, and I remember a client
Yeah,
said, "Oh, I know people at Deloitte, and you should talk to them." And it's not like we didn't spend any money on advertising. We
yeah.
did, but not much. The
Mm,
biggest businesses came in just by making connections, exploring them, cross selling, referrals, all that kind of thing. It's an
hmm.
underrated aspect of developing your business these days, and it's still far cheaper and far more profitable.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just about to ask because it sounded like you were like a little bit against the other methodologies, but obviously
No,
that's I can see that that's not the case.
no, we still
And it's
spend
so
some of
interesting.
that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so interesting because after talking to, I think it's 140 people now. I don't even know the number anymore. It's so common that a lot of companies, they rely on referrals and word of mouth, which are obviously the highest trust that you can have, which is
Yes.
awesome. And I
It's also the
totally
most
agree with it.
profitable.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of them don't know how to do it right.
That's right.
so so it's always like I'm having these conversations and I'm like, great, it's amazing that you've been able to get the business to the point that it is at today, solely relying on that. But if that goes away, where's the business? And they're like,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's not here.
it's a point. It's a point worth staying on for a second, if you don't mind, which
Go
is
ahead.
that
Yeah.
the biggest reasons people don't do that they don't get referrals and repeat business, is fear. They're afraid of giving something away for free, or they're afraid of taking a risk, or they're afraid of getting taken advantage of.
Mm,
And that's not a way to work. I mean, nobody's going to trust you if you don't trust them. So one of the arts is to figure out how to trust them in the first place.
mm,
You won't trust anybody who doesn't trust you. Nobody's going to trust you if you don't trust them. I mean, it's pretty simple. So you give stuff away. You offer up hypotheses. For example, if you're let's say you're meeting with a client for the first time in a social situation. Maybe you're going out to dinner, with them and their spouse, with you and your spouse, and you know them from business, but you don't know them personally. Well, what
hmm,
do? You buy a bottle of wine on the way over to their place. That's kind of understood. But
hmm,
if you take an analogy to business, if you go into a first meeting, the way to sorry, let me finish the wine thing. Instead of just buying a bottle of wine, what if you say, "Gee, I think they went to Italy last summer. What if we bought them a really nice bottle of Barolo and tied it up with ribbon, the national colors of Italy or something?" Well, that's a
hmm.
risk because you don't know. They may be alcoholics, or or maybe it was Spain they went to. The
Yeah.
point is, you get credit for having taken that little risk. So if
Hmm.
you're going into a new client, rather than play it safe and only tell them things that you're guaranteed, what you do is say, "Listen, you know more about your business than I do, obviously. But, we know a few things, and we've taken a look at some of your situations, and it occurs to us maybe X over here is a big issue for you. Is that true?" So you hedge it, but it's a hypothesis, which could be wrong. And there's only two possible answers, and they're both good. The first one is when they say, "Yes, X is a big issue. Anything you have on that, lovely to talk to you." The second one's even better. They say, everybody thinks X is an issue. No, it's Y. In which
Hmm.
case you say, "Oh my God, the minute you said that, I realize how right you are. Tell me about why."
Yeah.
They'll love to tell you about why. Well, what's
Hmm.
everybody's favorite subject? Themselves. If you're willing to listen to them, to pay
Hmm.
attention to them, to sort of, grant them the importance of your fine attention, that's huge. So all you got to do is take the risk of possibly being wrong, which isn't even that much of a risk anyway. So
Yeah.
that's why people don't do that very well because they're afraid of stupid stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like that. I like how you also mentioned they will often just tell you what's the issue.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, it's not it, and then it uncovers the actual
yeah,
thing, which
that's
allows
right.
both of you to tackle the right thing.
You don't have to figure out pain points and all that other rot. They'll tell you if you're in a conversation with them and they trust you. They'll tell you.
Yeah, that's so interesting too. Maybe add some cheese to that wine as well. You never know.
Right.
Yeah, and when it comes to, I'm interested in hearing. Obviously, you don't have to give me the entire summary of all your books, but I'm interested in hearing maybe one or two of the biggest, maybe the most impactful things that you think people can take away from
Yeah.
the lessons that you share on those books. Obviously, I'm more than happy to leave everything down below as well so they can check it out for themselves. But I'd
That's
love to hear
fine.
that from you as well, from your own perspectives, as you were the one who wrote them.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you two answers to that. One is the one that I used to open all my speeches with, and the other one is what I think is probably the single most important thing, the
So is the
opener,
first one
which
the
I
story that you told me about,
uh,
the silly story?
uh,
You mentioned you start all your speeches with a silly
yes,
story. Is this it?
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
I'm
Yeah, this
excited.
is it.
I'm
And there's a
excited.
reason I kept using it for 20 years. It was my first big sales call in a consulting firm. It was with a abrasives company, which makes sandpaper and grinding wheels and that kind of thing. And we go to meet the guy, VP of marketing for sandpaper. And, you pour the coffee, you exchange the business cards. And then he looks at me and he says, "Tell me, Mr. Green, what experience do you have doing marketing studies for industrial consumables?" I thought, what is that? And then I thought, oh, sandpaper. Okay. And I thought, we don't have any experience doing marketing studies for sandpaper. What do I know? And I'm scrambling what to think. And my boss, fortunately, was with me at the time. Sorry, let me turn
All
that
good.
off. Um, and he interjected and he said, "None that I can think of. What else would you like to talk about?" Well, I was shocked. You don't say that. But it
Mm,
turns out that was exactly the right thing to say. If you don't know the answer to something, for God's sake, say, "I don't know." Because paradoxically, that's the most credibility enhancing thing you can say. Everybody else
mm,
is going to tell you how smart they are, and maybe they don't know exactly this, but they know that, and they get the information. Who cares? If you're willing to say, "I don't know," that sets you apart from everybody. It says you're self confident enough, you're not enough of a BS artist to claim that you know everything. Wow, suddenly people relax and say, "Okay, this guy's not going to lie to me."
mm,
So, I mean, that sounds like a small thing, but the ability to admit you don't know something turns out
mm-hmm.
to be exactly, you wouldn't expect it, but it works.
Yeah, it's
The other one,
instant reporting credibility.
that's
It's
right.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny that the thing that enhances your credibility the
Yeah.
most is admitting your ignorance, but it's
Yeah,
true.
I know. Yeah, go ahead. Finish, on
And
to
the
the second
biggest
one. I like
thing,
that.
people ask me, what's the one, if I had to take away one thing, what is it? My answer is to be a good listener in the following sense: not listening for facts or data or even proving your hypothesis, listening so that the other person feels heard, understood, recognized, seen. It's a very emotional kind of thing. And you do that by paying attention and by
Hmm.
visibly paying attention, by throwing away your notes and your agenda, leaning in, locking in on their eyes, a little bit of reflective listening, playing back what you heard, but,
Hmm.
adding value, because that, people want recognition, authenticity, acceptance. So
Hmm.
that turns out, if I had to pick one thing, that's it. Listen so people feel heard.
I like
That,
that. I also like. I'll touch on something that you just mentioned there, which is authenticity, and it seems to keep
yeah.
coming up in a lot of conversations that I have, and I keep mentioning.
I've heard a couple of your other things where people
Yeah, I
mention it.
keep
Yes.
mentioning the study that comes up. I'm not sure if you heard the story of the study that I spoke about someone else with someone else. Did you hear that one as well or no? Are
I
you
may
familiar with
have, but go ahead.
The Spain study? Are you familiar with it?
No.
So the Spain study, so not the country Spain, but SPANE. I don't
Okay.
recall what exactly it stands for, but it was a study where they were measuring people's frequencies and the state that they were in. So if they're in a sad state, a depressed state, grief state, whatever it might be, their hypothesis is frequencies of that they would emit would be very low. And then they were on the other side of that same coin, like, okay, great. What's the highest frequency that people can achieve? Is it happiness? Is it joy? Oh, I think
Yeah.
it's going to be gratitude. And that was their hypothesis. But it turns out that it wasn't any of those. It was authenticity. When
Huh.
people were in an authentic state, they emitted the highest frequency possible. And I think it's so interesting that that always keeps coming up. It's so many, so many conversations and so many people that I speak with, because I think authenticity. One from that study, it shows that you kind of emit that vibration. People can feel that, so you have that in your gut feeling. Oh, I can tell this person is truthful.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from. I think so, at least.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that as long as you show people that you truly are listening, that you truly care, that you truly want to give value, that you truly are present in that moment,
Yeah.
they can feel that. And once they feel that, that's the trust, that's the rapport, that's the
Yeah.
credibility, that's
That's
everything that you
right.
need. But
There's
oftentimes people are just looking for their turn to speak, or looking for their turn to
that's right.
find that specific thing. And I hope I can find that thing, because if I find that thing, then I'll be able to give you my thing. And it's like, is that really
Yeah,
how
it
it's
doesn't
supposed to
work.
go? No, yeah, exactly. And it doesn't. Yeah. So I wanted to share that
Well,
with
it's
you.
interesting. I was just an hour ago just listening to a TED talk from a Harvard Business School professor who made the point, which I totally agree with. She said, all of us as human beings, we could recognize inauthenticity in a moment. Literally, a
Hmm.
moment is all it takes. And I don't know about the people listening to this, but if they're like all the other business clients I have, they hear the Spain study that you just mentioned, and they immediately go to behavioralizing. Oh, I should raise the frequency of my voice, so that way they'll think I'm being authentic. No, no,
Hmm.
no. Don't try and Scientologize this. Don't behavioralize it. Don't metricize it. Get in touch with who the heck you are and stop being afraid of it. Get it out
Hmm.
there. That means sharing, your feelings, commenting on other people's feelings, not being afraid to say, "Gee, I'm not sure I agree with that." That's and
Hmm.
as you pointed out, the most important of all is reacting to other people, in real time, which shows you're
Hmm.
paying attention, you're connected.
Yeah, awesome. Good stuff, Charlie. I have two more questions for you here.
Sure.
One of them is one that I've been asking everybody, and then the next one is not a question for me. It's a question from the past guest.
Okay.
But we'll start with the one that I've been asking everybody, which is slightly not applicable to you now, since you're not in the business anymore, mostly. But I'll still ask anyways, and
Yeah.
then maybe something can come from it. If you had a magic wand, and let's pretend you're still in the business right now,
Right.
and you could just solve one single problem within the business, maybe something that's a challenge, an obstacle, something that just always keeps coming up, what would you want to solve to be able to achieve massive growth for the company?
Wow. That's a great question, by the way. Thank you. A couple of things come to mind. One is most of us as people, all the time, we suffer from some level of fear. And fear, I've come to believe, is the root negative human emotion. If you scratch anger or jealousy or frustration or resentment, you look beneath that, there's always something fearful. And if we could teach people to be less fearful and more confident, you're going to get hurt, but it's not going to hurt near as bad as you think. And
Mm-hmm.
you're going to fail, but that's not as bad as you think. That certainly would be one thing. Um, the other thing, I guess, that comes to mind, I'm not sure these are great answers, but I'm just giving you what's coming to mind,
Sure.
is that uh, I think this is true of my business, maybe others too. You have to model the behavior that you want to be. It's especially true in trust. You can't teach people about trust if you don't live it, if you don't act it, if you're not a role model, if you don't show it to people. I mean, you get accused of being a hypocrite with good reason. So, reminding people to live the values, be role models all the time, be the change that you want to be in the world, that sort of stuff. That's right, because if you align people along something fundamental like values, that's more than half the battle.
Hmm. Interesting. I want to touch on something that you mentioned about fear, actually,
Yeah.
and thank you for sharing those. When you say fear, do you mean internal fear for company members, or the fear of prospects that are thinking of possibly buying your solutions?
No, I mean mostly psychological fear, individual,
Mm.
internal, personal.
Mm, I
I
see.
mean, you're touching on. We deal with some. Most of the clients that we have, they'll say, "How can we become a more trusted company?" And I
Mm.
usually say it's not the right answer. Well, but there are two answers to that. One is go hire a PR firm and put out a bunch of interesting tweets and put a positive spin on stuff. And the other one is work to make sure that all your people know how to trust others and are trustworthy with others.
Mm.
And it may take longer, but it won't take more than 6 or 9 months. If you could actually get everybody individually to behave that way, then every interaction they have with suppliers, customers becomes a trust based interaction. And it doesn't
Mhm.
take long for that to get reflected in their perception of the company, right?
Mm.
So, yeah,
Yeah, just all it takes 6 9 months,
yeah,
and you can see a full change. And it's so interesting because if oftentimes it seems like a long time, but if you are able to front load that, which is
yes,
quote unquote not really in front load, but if you're able to do that, then the entirety of the time frame beyond that, it'll be so much more efficient. Which is like you
yes,
you buy back your time by quote unquote wasting time up
Yeah,
front. So
and
it's
it
that's an interesting.
yeah, and it's
But
not
yeah,
even
thank you
that
for
much of
sharing
a
that. Thank you
waste.
for sharing
Yeah.
that. And then final question here, which is actually I'm interested to hear your perspective because this will actually be a little bit more in my head. If you hear the question, it would sound more applicable to someone who's actually still like in the day to day and going through things. So I would love to hear your answer either as if you were running the business or as you are right now. You can choose which way you want to
Okay.
answer this. But here's the question. You ready?
Yep.
The question is, on your best day, what's the one or two things you're the most proud of that you've achieved that day?
Hmm. Uh, well, the answer is the same now as it was when I was still running the business because I
Hmm.
still feel kind of attached to it. And I am. I'm in frequent conversation with people in the firm. I think it's when you connect with somebody, either like in a seminar or a workshop or a webinar, and the light bulb goes off for them and they go, oh my God, I just realized that, what I did the other day was or wasn't in tune with what you're talking about. That's huge. I got to really absorb that. I mean, to be able to impact another person's perception, mindset, attitude, belief system, that's very gratifying, more than anything else. So, the ability to change
Hmm.
people's mindsets, I guess I'd sum that up.
Awesome. I really, really like that. Charlie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you sharing all that stuff. I think
Oh,
this
you're
has
welcome.
been one of the most fruitful conversations with so many stories, so many lessons. So I really appreciate you obviously sharing all those. Where should people go if they want to learn a little bit more about you? Maybe keep up with the blogs, learn about
Sure.
Trusted Advisor Associates, maybe about your books. Yeah, tell it all.
Sure. It's 90% of that you can find on the website, trustedadvisor.com. That's spelled with an OR at the end, trustedadvisor.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn newsletter called Breaking Good, like Breaking Bad, but Breaking Good. And yeah, that's it. Website and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Charlie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.